Hey there, welcome back to the channel. If you're not subscribed already, please go ahead and click that subscribe button and give me a like if you like this video. If you don't, leave me a comment and just let me know why, if they need to be shorter or if it's just not helping you feel the spirit. Today's lesson comes from the book of Ruth, all 4 chapters, as well as 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 3. So we'll be talking about the story of Ruth and then a little bit later the story of Samuel and his mother Hannah. So there are a lot of women discussed this week. So if you're going to be teaching a Relief Society lesson, this is going to be a really awesome lesson for you. Some real heroes in the scriptures. It's titled, "My Heart Rejoiceth in the Lord." And so the story of Ruth is really interesting. We don't get a lot of background to the beginning of the story. It just kind of, this book just pops up in the Bible. We don't quite know. We could kind of probably guesstimate the timeline because it's 3 generations before King David, but we're not exactly sure when this happened, why it happened, how this record became part of the scriptures, as no one discussed here per se was a prophet. There were some prominent wealthy people involved, but that doesn't get you recognition in the scriptures. So Ruth chapter 1 lays as much foundation as we can, and in verse 2, here's what it says. It says, "The name of the man who came from Bethlehem, his name was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there." So, for whatever reason, they decided to migrate, maybe some work opportunities, maybe just some problems back at home. They chose, you know what, it's time that we, find a new place of scenery and try to build a life there for ourselves. So, verse 3, we find out that Elimelech had 2 sons, and it says that he dies, and Naomi is just left with her 2 sons. Okay, so far, not the greatest for Naomi, but she's still, based on the laws and the customs of that time, there's still men in her life that can have ownership to land and can make sure that she's provided for. So verse 5 is almost in a way Naomi's experiencing like the book of Job kind of stuff, right? Verse 5, "And after they had dwelled there 10 years, okay, and they had both taken wives, one Orpah and the other named Ruth, it says, Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman, Naomi, was left of her 2 sons and her husband." So husband Elimelech takes the family to a foreign country. Everyone in the family dies, and now Naomi is just left with her 2 foreign daughter-in-laws. Apparently, in that time, they were living there 10 years. Her children did not have any kids, so she has no posterity or offspring at this time. And even in good old-fashioned Israel, women did not have the right to own land. So the fact that Elimelech had property and had inheritance to his name doesn't really help her to be able to provide for herself, right? Because of the customs of that time. Wrong as it was, that's just the nature of the story we're dealing with. So, verse 7, let's start to get the meat of the story. You can imagine if you're a wife and mother and both of your sons die and your husband die, you're going to be in a very poor mental state. I could not imagine what's going through her head. She's having, and we'll get into this, about how she really just feels like the Lord must be upset with her, because this doesn't happen to people, right? Just left with nothing, your namesake gone. Verse 7, "Therefore she went out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah." So she's like, okay, I'm blowing this popsicle stand. We got to go back to the only place that I really know where people can hopefully help me out, back to Bethlehem. Verse 8, "And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me." So right now, they're just leaving Moab. Naomi says, she's really trying to convince him in her sour state, hey, it's probably just best, you don't owe me anything. You dealt well with me. You helped me bury my sons. You were really good to me all this time. You don't owe me anything, and we're not family. So you're welcome to, go back to the country you're from. And, while you're still young, you're probably in your late 20s, early 30s, you still time to find a husband and start a family. If you come with me, Like, it's really not advantageous for your life to come with me. She continues on, verse 9. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. So at this point, they've been living together 10 years. They're literally all each other have. Like, no, we're family. We're coming with. But Naomi persists. So verse 13, she says, like, well, what are you going to do? What, you gonna stay with me? Like, I'm way too old to get married again. And even if I had sons, what, are you going to wait for them to grow up so that you can marry them and like still be part of my family? She said, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. She's like, don't punish yourselves because I'm being punished of the Lord. Just go and live your life. Like, it's fine. Like, I'm not upset with you. You haven't done anything wrong to me. So she continues to try to talk him out of it, and they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So that sign of a kiss sounds like she's saying, all right, you know what? You're right. I'm going to go. You've talked me into it. I'll go back to Moab where I'm from, and I'll try to start a life and a family there. I love you. But you're right. Like, I really should, continue on before, like, we're all just left husbandless and, childless. And no one should blame Orpah because of this. Like, it's not her fault. She, really, if you look at the mechanics of the story, she's doing exactly what she probably should be doing, right? Like, she doesn't know what is ahead of her in Judah. She has no family there. Obviously, Naomi's going to be in an incredibly poor financial place and not going to be able to help her. So they're going to be pretty much destitute when they go back there. And that won't happen to her if she goes back to Moab, where she's from. Not to mention the Israelites were kind of told in the book of Joshua, like, hey, do not intermarry with the people in the surrounding areas. Do not adhere to their customs, not become like them. And so it's not like they're going to be that inviting to Moabites coming in, not necessarily having the same background in a worship of a deity. So it's not really in her best interest to go there. But we do know that Ruth and Orpah are not sisters. They're not direct sisters. They're sisters-in-law, so they've kind of been living together as a family. Verse 15, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, and unto her gods return thou after thy sister-in-law. So Orpah returning to her faith and the things that she was raised. And here's what Ruth says, and this is, it's a little bit early to get into the takeaway from the lesson, but here we go. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge, and thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. I pray that we all, everyone in this life, find people like Ruth that are that loyal to us. And Naomi, if you thought it was bad, it gets worse. So verse 20, she says unto them, as they get back into town, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. So she's giving herself a nickname. If we look at the footnote there in verse 20 for Mara, it says, in Hebrew, it means bitter or very sad. So she wants her nickname to be very sad or bitter. Okay, that, like, imagine it's like, hey, don't call me Eric, call me Sad. Like, my name's Sad because the Lord hates me, right? Like, this is where Naomi's at, and she really, really needs Ruth more than she could possibly know. We get to Ruth Chapter 2, and at this point, they don't really know what they're going to do, but they know, hey, listen, we've got some close relatives that live nearby that got some money, got a couple farms. Why don't, Ruth, you just go kind of like make your way onto the farm and start helping the harvest. It's barley season right now, so they're going to be harvesting barley. Just go out and act like you belong, pretty much. And mind you, these are not Naomi's relatives. These are Elimelech's relatives. And so they're just kind of trying to hitch their wagon to the fact, like, hey, I know we've been gone for a really long time, but Elimelech was my husband, and these are my daughter-in-laws, so like maybe we can like just kind of tie our way into the family here. So she goes out and she does exactly what Naomi says, because this is basically 100% Naomi's plan, is just like go out there and be somebody. And so verse 8 through 11 of chapter 2, we get to the first interaction between Boaz and Ruth. Ruth is obviously discovered out there, and Boaz is like, who's this damsel? Who's this girl out here? And they're like, oh, well, she's like from Naomi's family or something. So Boaz goes to her and says, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not glean in another field, neither go from thence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath been fully showed to me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother, and the land of thy nativity, thou art come unto a people which thou knowest not heretofore. So Boaz is saying, I recognize the sacrifice that you've made, and you've been quite a good friend and a helpmeet to Naomi, who is my relative Elimelech's wife, right? So that means a lot to me that you would stay by her side. You've come here. It's likely, I don't really know what people look like, but I feel like the Moabites are kind of a different race of people. So she's putting herself in uncharted waters, coming around people who don't look like her. She doesn't fit in. She doesn't know anything about the customs of the people other than Naomi and her family. And she's throwing herself into the fire. And Boaz really respects that. He has mercy on her. And verse 15 says, When she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not, and let fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So she gleaned in the field even until evening, and beat out that which she had gleaned. And it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and brought forth and gave her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. So Boaz basically just says, like, take as much as you can carry. Like, I'm going to tell the guys to just leave a bunch behind for you, and whatever you can take, just take it. I'm here for you guys. So what I like about this is it's, not that we're going to relate Boaz to the Lord or anything, but in our lives, it's not that much different. The Lord wants to provide for us, but at the same time, Boaz didn't go out and glean for her. Like, she had to go and glean and harvest her own of the abundance that was there. And it's no different with the Lord in our lives. Like, he really, really wants to bless us, but it's upon us to do our part and go work for that which he wants to provide for us. Ruth 3, and this is going to be a huge portion of the story. I hope this doesn't take the lesson too long. Naomi devises a plan. She's like, listen, man, you obviously are in with this guy, not to mention he's a close kin of our family. And this is, we'll really get into the historical background of what's happening here. But I think it's time that you offer yourself to him and try to get him to marry you. So let's read. So Ruth 3, 1-3, it says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, Ruth, my daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. So basically saying, clean yourself up, put on some perfume, make yourself presentable, and go to where he's going to sleep and present yourself to him. Now, it's not what you're thinking. This is not what, the custom, what it would look like in our day if somebody did that, snuck into somebody's bedroom and lay there and wait for them, looking as pretty as they could. She is just following the customs of that time. So verse 9, and again, Ruth is just going with it. This is 100% Naomi's plan. Ruth hasn't given any input. She said, hey, whatever you want me to do, I will do. Verse 9, as Ruth is at the foot of the bed, he said, who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. Okay, and so now we get into the historical background of what's happening here. So Boaz was to Naomi and Ruth is what is known as a goel. And a goel in ancient times was like a kinsman redeemer. So if we look at the background of this, in Leviticus 25, a goel or a kinsman, it says in verse 48 and 49, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him, either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him or of his family may redeem him, or if he be able, he may redeem himself. So there are four things that a goel or a kinsman redeemer was responsible for, and this is in Leviticus, in Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And this is not something you were bound to by law, but just like it's, almost in our day how young men are it's kind of a rite of passage that they serve a mission, right? It's not like you get kicked out of the church if you don't do it, but your honor kind of goes along with your willingness to fulfill the commandment, right? The commandment in our day is, hey, when you turn 18, 19, like you are to serve a mission. If you don't do that, no one's going to speak evil of you, but it's just kind of expected that it's a part of being a part of this culture and society. Number one, he was responsible to be an avenger of blood, to make sure the murder of a family member answered for the crime. Two, buy a fellow Israelite out of slavery. Three, responsible to buy back family land that had been forfeited. That's what's happening in this case. Number four, he was responsible to carry on the family name by marrying a childless widow. And that's from Deuteronomy 25. And so there are kind of two parts here, that they're going to lose their land because women in this time were not allowed to own land. Again, these are not my laws. This is just what's going on, okay? And so they're going to lose their land that was Elimelech's, and none of the women in the story had the opportunity to have children. So it was the goel's responsibility or duty to marry a childless widow, which is what's happening in this case. And the reason why Naomi sends Ruth in is because it's actually a right that Ruth has to be able to do this, as Boaz being the goel of her and Naomi. She had the right to expect him to be willing to marry her and to raise a family and to perpetuate the name of Elimelech, who does not have any male offspring. It's very important in that time that there were male offspring to carry on the name. But what's important is that Naomi didn't counsel her to be a victim demanding something, but to submit herself. And that's what, kneeling at the foot of his bed was not like to present herself for any potential extracurricular favors, but rather to show that she's willing to submit to him if he was willing to honor that duty and responsibility as a goel. So she asks him, and if we go back to verse 9, to spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid. And that is, spreading the skirt over a widow in ancient times was essentially your claim to her as a wife. And this is something that Jews still do today, that, when a Jewish male, when they marry their wife, to place the skirt over the woman's head, showing that they are willing to take ownership for their protection, that they are claiming responsibility to protect the woman throughout the remainder of their lives. So this has historical and modern day significance, what she's asking him to do, and that the same practice still exists today. Verse 11, okay, and so now Ruth has done everything in her power. She's done what she was asked to do, and it's kind of like, I'm putting all the chips in, and we're going to see what Boaz says to this request. It says, verse 11, and now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. So we must know from this situation that there is a significant age gap, because he calls her my daughter, right, along with all the other maidens out there. And he probably never had expected or tried to foster a relationship with her. And so he's really getting surprised by what he's being asked to do. And he says, verse 12, and now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, or a goel, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth, which is an oath. Lie down until the morning. So he's like, listen, go sleep on it. I'm going to call this other guy who's actually, has the duty and responsibility to be your kinsman redeemer. If he won't do it, then I will do it. So chapter 4. And remember, the whole point of a goel was to make sure, with those 4 things, one of them being to make sure that a childless widow had the opportunity to have the namesake carry on. And there's some great foreshadowing there as we get into this part. So, chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. After Boaz sits down with 10 elders of the city and the closest kinsman, who is not named, and that's significant here. Verse 4, I thought to advertise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, talking about the land. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. Right, so you're first in line, I'm second in line. It's up to you. And he said, I'll redeem it. He's like, oh, there's land that I can get? Pff, absolutely, I'm taking that. Then Boaz said, and here's the kicker, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead of Elimelech upon his inheritance. And he's like, whoa. Verse 6, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. And I love this part. Verse 9, because Boaz recognized what's happening. He says, verse 9, Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, basically shouting, ye are all witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion and Mahlon's and the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. And I love this part, and this isn't something that really talks about in the lesson, but what role Boaz was trying to fill is to make sure the namesake of these women would live on. And the kinsman, closest kinsman, was not willing to take on that responsibility. And guess what? We never learn his name. So his namesake didn't carry on. It would have, had he taken upon himself this oath and responsibility as the kinsman redeemer. He was not willing to do that, and he's forgotten from history. And that was probably done intentionally. I imagine when the story is written down, his name was written somewhere, and the preparers of the books of the Bible opted to not include his name. And I think that's quite a lesson, right? In my notes, I just wrote down how it's very similar to a scripture in D&C 132, that many are called, but few are chosen. And why are they not chosen? Because their hearts are set so much upon the things of this world. A.k.a., I don't want to mar my own inheritance, that they forget this one lesson, that the rights of the priesthood are inseparably connected with the powers of heaven. Powers of heaven cannot be controlled nor handled except on the principles of righteousness, right? And so this kinsman who went unnamed was afraid of marring his own inheritance and what would happen to his legacy if he married a Moabitess woman. He was cool getting the land, but he was afraid of what people might think of him if he took upon himself a wife of the people of this foreign land. And it ended up making it so his name was erased from history. And if we want to know who does get remembered here, it's not just Boaz has a story written about him, but we know, as it's written, that a few generations later, that David, in which the lineage of Jesus Christ can be traced back to, was born. So Boaz and Ruth were the great-grandparents of King David and a direct line to Jesus Christ. And I would argue that any of us would relish at the opportunity to be part of that direct family tree. And that was all because Boaz kept his covenant, and Ruth understood her rights and was willing to submit herself to Boaz. And they ended up having several children and a great family. Everyone was taken care of. And I think it's really not just a love story, but really a story of obedience. That, through obedience, not just Ruth, accepting Jehovah as her God and forsaking the gods of Moab, but being a steward over Naomi in her time of crisis and adhering to the customs of the Israelites, which she had no idea of, but she was willing to listen to Naomi throughout the whole experience. So let's fast forward to the book of Samuel, and here's another heroic woman in the scriptures. Be focused on Hannah here, and a little bit of background on Hannah, that she was one of two wives of Elkanah, and the other wife had many children. Hannah had been barren for her entire life, even though she was loved more than the other wife, that she was unable to have children. That's literally all she wanted was a son. As we learned before, how important it was for the namesake of a family to continue. She just wanted to bear a son so bad, so much in fact that she was willing to sacrifice him, not physically, but spiritually, to the Lord, and have him go serve with the priests and give up, the claim to her son if she was just able to have one. So let's start in verse 11. It said that she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. She's like, can't you just recognize I'm feeling really sorrowful here? I'm literally just praying unto the Lord and asking him to help me. She was privileged to have a son who she named Samuel. And she said, listen, as soon as I can, he's weaned, I'm going to give him to Eli and to the priests to serve in, the tabernacle. Verse 26, and she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also have I lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. So it's not just like for a couple years. Like for honoring that petition, she was willing to give up her son Samuel for his entire life. And so the time in which Samuel is living is not one where everyone's being righteous and, it's just this perfect utopia. He's literally living in a, for him would be like a modern day Babylon. There's a lot of really iniquitous things going on, especially within Eli's family. And before we get to what was going on in his family, we want to talk about what they were doing with the sacrifices they were offering unto the Lord. Now, these sacrifices were akin to outward expressions of inward commitments to follow God, just as we do in our day. Things like just making covenants with God, baptism and the sacrament, and rituals that we do today that are different than the law of Moses. But the significance was they need to be followed to a particular T, right? And so verse 13 through 17 talks about what the customs were of the priests under Eli at this time and how conflicted it must have been for Samuel to understand the things that were going on here. And it says, and the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething, or while it was boiling, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand, and he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Also, before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh of roast for the priest. For will he not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw? And if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently. Then take as much as thy soul desireth. He would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Wherefore the sin of the young man was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. And I want to focus on that phrase, that they abhorred the offering of the Lord. So they were performing these ordinances or rituals, right? They were going through the motions, but they hated doing it. And I thought about, if there are things in our modern day church that maybe we don't enjoy doing. Do we abhor having to pay our tithing? And I put a lot of thought into this, that why someone might abhor paying tithing. It's like, listen, like God can create anything, right? He can just create wealth. He doesn't need my widow's mite. Like, what does that do for him? Like, kind of like the story of Gideon, where Gideon's father told the people coming to get his son, like, listen, Baal can fend for himself. He doesn't need you to kill my son. He can, if Baal is unhappy, he can kill my son himself. Like, God can find money himself, right? Or, the idea of, do I pay tithing on my net income or my gross income? And it really just comes down to the blessings that you want. Do you want gross blessings? Do you want net blessings? Or you're thinking, oh yeah, but on my drive to work, I have to pay for my gas, my insurance, oil changes, tires, tolls. I have to buy uniforms, buy dress shoes, ties, slacks, etc. just to be able to keep my job. That should be deductible out of my increase, right? Because those are things that really come out of my income in order to keep my job. Please do not rob God. Please never think that this is acceptable to justify robbing the Lord of 1/10 of our increase, right? Do not abhor his commandments, because just like that thought that he can just create his own wealth, can he not therefore open up the windows of heaven, that there is not room enough for you to receive blessing upon the 10th that you're giving him? Right? The same reasoning and rationale plays out, that it makes way more sense to follow the commandment than to question why the commandment exists in the first place. And just this idea of vowing vows like Hannah did, there's a really cool scripture that I like in Ecclesiastes, and I invite you to pause this video and look this up. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. Easy to remember. It says, When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better it is that thou shouldest not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay. Okay, so the breakdown of that is, if you make a promise to God, the promise that you make when you take upon you the name of Jesus Christ at baptism, defer not to pay the cost of that promise, because he has no pleasure in fools. It's better that you don't make a covenant with him, that you will remember the Lord Jesus Christ and serve him in all things, in all times, in all places, than to make that covenant and then not keep it. Okay? So Samuel, he's seeing these things go on. And obviously, he has to make a choice of what he's going to do. And I think in our day, this happens all the time. I did not grow up in Utah in the stronghold of the church, or Arizona or Idaho, but there are a lot of people that have told me in my experiences that just saying like, oh, I don't do this because like I'm a member of the church. That doesn't absolve you from the feelings of peer pressure, because a lot of the people that might be committing sin there were also raised in the church. You're like, yeah, I'm a member too. Like, let's just do it, right? And here's what's really cool, what it says about Samuel. Okay, verse 26. And the child Samuel grew on and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. Right? And it's really, really similar to Luke 2:52 that the church has been pushing in our youth programs about growing in, favor and wisdom and stature with man and with God. Right? That Samuel didn't just make a choice like, I'm going to follow God. He obviously grew in favor with God by keeping his commandments, but also grew in favor with men, even within the society that he was living in. So we learn here it is possible to stand for something and still have a positive influence on the people around you who are not living or not choosing to live the same way as you. So 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1, we learn that, the society at large was living in a state of apostasy. It says, And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. So it kind of sounds like there wasn't a prophet at this time, right? There wasn't some direct line of communication to the Lord. And I like that phrase that it was precious in those days. Verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. So Samuel himself had not been taught the scriptures and really didn't have a relationship with the Lord, right? And it just shows us that we don't have to be perfect or ready to be able to hear the voice of the Lord and represent him and be on his errand, right? Because he didn't know him, hadn't read the scriptures. Does that sound like anyone who's ever served a mission? You really weren't ready, but you went out there because you felt like you were supposed to. I wish the Lord weren't this mystical all the time, because at this point, Samuel had been called twice. He ends up being called a total of 4 times. It takes to the 4th time till he finally understands what's going on. But the 3rd time, verse 8, and the Lord called Samuel again, and he arose and went to Eli and said, here am I, for thou didst called me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Because the first 2 times Samuel did the same thing. Eli, you called me? No, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. So the 3rd time, Eli knows that it's the Lord that's calling him, right? And it's really reminiscent of the Lord speaking to the Nephites. And they hear this voice out there somewhere, and it takes them 3 times to be able to hear that. It says that their ears were opened, that they could understand the voice, right? And that begins to happen to Samuel. Verse 10, and the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, speak, for thy servant heareth. And that's what Eli had told him to say. And so now Samuel has prepared himself to hear the Lord. So the Lord tells Samuel, here's what's going on in your society. There's a lot of iniquity in Eli's family, and Eli is allowing this to happen. He's supposed to represent me. He is not cast out this wickedness from the tabernacle. They're letting women come into the tabernacle, and there's, the priests are sleeping with the women that come to the tabernacle. This is abhorrent to me. Just like those priests abhorred the covenants of God, the Lord is abhorring the actions of these people. And so he tells Samuel that Eli and his family are going to get cut off. And so Samuel hears this, he's like, oh my goodness, I can't tell my boss that. And so Eli says, no, tell me everything. I don't care. Just tell me everything. And Samuel, verse 18, and Samuel told him every whit and hid nothing from him. And he said, it is the Lord. Let him doeth what seemeth him good. So Eli knows he's not ignorant to what's going on. He knows that he's made mistakes by not condemning this evil, right? He wanted to just have favor with man. He had forgotten about how important it was to have favor with God and stand up for what was right. Let the consequence follow, right? And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. And I love this. This is the end of the lesson, but also one of the most crucial parts of the lesson, that phrase in verse 19, that Samuel let none of the Lord's words fall to the ground. I think in our times, we probably use a phrase like, he didn't let the words fall upon deaf ears, right? So when the Lord said something to Samuel, Samuel did the thing that was asked of him, right? There's a quote from Joseph Smith in the History of the Church where Joseph Smith is speaking to the saints in Kirtland, Ohio, and he says this, and I think this may be the takeaway for everyone here. It happens to be at the end as well. I made it my rule, when the Lord commands, do it. And let that be a defining quality in all of us, that when the Lord commands, do it. Just don't ask questions. We may not understand why. We may not know what's in it for us. Maybe there's nothing in it for us immediately. Maybe the blessings of whatever the Lord has asked of us may not come for a generation later. But when the Lord commands, do it. I just want to bear my testimony how important it is not just to gain favor with God. That should be paramount in everything that we do, to be living the way God would have us live, that we can hear his voice, that it doesn't take us 4 times. When the Lord speaks to us, he's not always going to give us 4 chances to hear his voice, that we stay in tune with the Spirit. And number 2, that we use our influence to find favor with men also, because the only way the Lord's work can be pressed forward is through us. We literally are his hands here on earth. So we need to not only gain wisdom and favor with God, but also with man, just like Samuel did, and to be loyal to those that you've made covenants to. And, think about that in the story of Ruth and Naomi, that Ruth did not have to. She could have walked away just like Orpah, and she would have not been at fault. But guess what? She would not have been remembered in history, and she would have lost out on the opportunity to be in the direct line to the Lord Jesus Christ on the family tree. And I just want to bear my testimony of how important it is to be on the Lord's side, to leave our gods, the gods of Moab, behind during our day. You know, the things that occupy our time. People make time for the things that are important to us. All right, so if we're making time for things that are not of God, those are our gods, whether it be money, whether it be sports, whether it be social media. If we are giving that more of our time than we are the Lord, those things are our God. And like Ruth, we need to be willing to forsake those things and choose the Lord. And wherever the Lord would have us go, we will go. I bear my testimony of these things in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.